Hey everybody, I'm Lee George Cade with the Geekshow podcast, and this is GSPC Tabletop. This is session 2, Terrain Labs. We're going to talk about some really cool products that I use to work on terrain projects that I'm working on. And today I'll be highlighting some really cool expanded foam. It's like foam board, almost like foam core. It's called Celtec. That's how you spell it right there. C-E-L-T-E-C. Great stuff. Before I get into that, I want to talk about my sponsor, Shiv Games. Great little shop out in Murray, Utah. And here's the thing about Shiv. You can get just about any game, miniature, or paint 15 to 30% off of your retail prices. You want to give them a checkout and definitely tell them Geekshow says hey. So here's the thing about Celtec. This stuff is a small little sheet. It's only about, in this case, 2 millimeters thick. It's like PVC pipe, like the same stuff that you make a sprinkler out of, or that you would put together for a new trap under your sink. It's white. It's a little bit flexible. This is a piece that I've already cut off of a larger sheet. You can get a pretty big sheet, maybe 12 inches by 12 inches, and it ranges in thickness from 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter like this, all the way up to about 6 millimeters, which is pretty thick and probably too big for any kind of war games terrain that you might want to work on. So one of the cool pre-manufactured kits out there that you can get is from a company called Plastcraft. And Plastcraft makes these neat little buildings. This is made out of a very similar material, and from what I can tell, it's roughly the same thickness too. So anyway, let's see what we can do with this stuff today. I've already done a little bit of work with it, trying to build a causeway or kind of a bridge for my gremlins in Malifaux to run around on. Cool stuff about this Celtec in particular is that you can cut it, you can trim it, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. And I'll show you how that works. Of course, I've already kind of planned out the top part of this right here is going to be for some railings that I'm going to be building. And I'm going to go ahead and build some more railings right here. So I'll just mark that off. Probably looking for maybe 1/2 inch thick railings. Let's go ahead and cut 2 of those. This stuff is really super neat. There's another expanded PVC foam board out there. It's called Sintra, and Sintra is probably a little easier to find than Celtec right now. And I think you can find both of them on Amazon. But if you live in a big enough city, you might have a sign shop nearby that uses this stuff. A lot of the sign shops use Celtec and Sintra to make the signs that you see like on light up boards. It's pretty durable, and you can silk screen on it or print directly onto it. So pretty popular with a lot of the sign shops out there. And the nice part about that is if you go in and you ask nice enough, there's a pretty good chance that your local sign shop will just have some scrap that they're willing to give you, so they don't have to throw it away. You know, they're looking for great big huge sheets of it. You're just looking for small pieces of it. Regardless, if you don't have a local sign shop, you might have a plastics company. I know here in Salt Lake City we have Regional Supply, and they sell Sintra, and they may actually sell Celtec too. With Sintra, you can get a 6 millimeter sheet, so it's about 3 times thicker than this. That's like twice the size of a piece of foam board for about $30, and that seems expensive, but if you break it down, I know a lot of people in the cosplay community use Sintra for armor, because you can heat it up. You can heat it up with a heat gun, and with that you can form it, shape it, bend it, all kinds of fun stuff. So if you think about it, with that kind of an application, is really not that expensive at all. So you can see the inside of the fiber here. It's just a tiny bit rough, but you can snap it right off once you've scored it a couple of times. So now the cool part. So this is going to be a railing on a piece of bridge, but I want it to look like some roughed up wood. So I'm going to go ahead and break up the edge just a little bit. I'm just roughing it up with my hobby knife here. There's really no need to hold on to the shavings. Sometimes when you're working in this kind of a hobby, you hold on to just about everything for later applications. And I can't think of anything for little slivers of expanded PVC yet. I'm sure I'll come up with something. Nice part is I'll have plenty of it. So just kind of putting a little bit of a rough bevel on the edges here. I want to simulate a long piece of wood. And it's pretty cool how this works. Of course, you always want to work with a sharp razor blade. Trust me on this one. The reason being that a sharp razor blade is going to give you a thin, clean cut, which will be easier if you do get cut to mend back up. You don't want the jagged, nasty cut, if you get one, that a dull blade's going to give you. As far as X-Acto blades are concerned, this is your typical X-Acto hobby blade. I use a number 2 blade in it, and with Sintra and Celtec, I'm probably changing the blade every 2 or 3 days, just depending on how many hours I work on it. You'll know when it's dull, when it doesn't want to cut the main planks for you very much anymore. Alright, this is where the fun part comes in. So being this is how this is going to be a section of board, I'm going to go ahead and cut right here. I'm going to cut a little bit of a wedge divot out of this piece of Celtec. So it's almost like it's 2 separate pieces of board. And just to lead to that illusion a little bit more, I'm going to carve into it, going into that little divot. So it does look like it's 2 separate pieces. A little bit more over here too. Okay. Let's clean that up a little bit. Get a little more uniformity in there. Now, being that it is PVC, there's a little bit of speculation out there as to whether or not you need to prime Celtec or Sintra before you paint it. If you're doing a large armor piece, you probably want to prime it first. The thing with primer is that it gives you a uniform surface for your paint to adhere to later. And that uniformity is going to save you a lot of trouble as far as having, you'll notice that paint pieces that have been primed first, the paint tends to stick onto them a little bit longer. So I have these dental picks. I picked these up. You can get a little sleeve of them from Amazon, usually about $12. They get you 5 or 6 picks, and they'll have different types of shapes on them. You're not going to really use these sides over here. I have used them a little bit with sculpting. Sometimes when you're sculpting foliage, or if you're sculpting like chainmail, this little paddle bit here at the end looks really nice going into indentations. But with this project, we're going to be using this spade bit on this side. It's a little bit beveled. It doesn't have too sharp of a blade to it. I might actually take a grinder to it and sharpen that up a little bit. But for what we're doing today, it's not really a problem. So I'm just going to simulate wood grain, moving down this piece of board here. I'll give you a pretty nice indentation, but not actually gouge anything out. You don't want to push too hard. The Celtec is a lot softer than Sintra. With Sintra, you really have to apply a lot of pressure to get this kind of detail worked into it. I'm going to try a little bit later on. One of the tricks that I found with foam core, which is just 2 sheets of cardboard with expanded styrofoam in between, you can peel the paper off and actually carve into the styrofoam and coat it with glue. You can get some really neat effects. I've done stonework and a couple of other really neat things with that. But what I like to do is use a ballpoint pen to get those details in the foam core. So one of these days I'm going to actually take a piece of this Celtec and see if I can get the same effect. So you can see, got our board worked up. There's that simulated wood grain. Now another cool thing you can do is I want to put some fasteners in at the ends of the boards to to make it look like the gremlins that live in this area. This is going to be for a swamp. It's going to be like a walkway across the swamp. So I want to make it look like there's some fasteners in there that the gremlins lash together their walkways with. So I'm just taking this spade tip, just going to twist it around like you would with a pin vise or a finger drill. And because the Celtec is fairly soft, you can get those cool little nail holes or screw holes. Alright, so that'll be the railing on the walkway. Now, I've already done a little bit of work on this while I was trying to work out the material. So here I've already taken 2 planks that are about 6 inches long, and I've already done the texturing and the detail with them, just like with that handrail. That's on both sides. And then of course we've got these little plank boards here. I found out that the Celtec will actually take super glue to glue together, which is kind of cool, because before I always thought that you're going to have to use some sort of a PVC pipe putty or a PVC type cement, but that's not going anywhere. Just wiggling around pretty hard. I use Gorilla Glue. It's a really, really good super glue that uses tiny flecks of rubber in the actual super glue compound, so your stuff that's been glued together can actually take a little bit of an impact. It still kind of has a little wiggle and a bounce to it. Here's some of the smaller boards that I've already cut out and I've already shaped. So I'm going to finish those up and get this causeway here finished up. And then I'll show you what it looks like with a little bit of paint. It's pretty cool. Let's get these boards done up. Uniformity is definitely not a big deal with this. And even though this isn't sharp, you still want to watch your fingertips. Now, if you ever run a butter knife across your hand, it still doesn't feel good. All right. I'm not going to glue it on yet. I'm just testing the fit. Now, if you're really, really exacting with yourself, you'll want to be the kind of person who lines your artificial screw holes up with the support planks with the cross beams there. I'm not really worried about that. This is the thing that I'm going to be doing this causeway for. I'm going to be building a series of bridges and planks that go up on like stilt works or on larger legs, and they'll have stairways connecting them. And it's for the Malifaux game. They'll be playing at Shiv Games here in a couple of weeks, and the whole project is going to be based around having all these different walkways that are interconnected between these swamp houses that the gremlins live in. And even though I have these holes here, it's not really going to matter. No one's going to be looking at the walkway long enough to really notice that the screw holes aren't lined up. You'll notice that some of the planks are uneven. This one's farther in, this one's farther out. It's just, you know, I think it was built by a bunch of inbred hillbilly swamp gremlins. I don't think that their engineering skills are necessarily all that phenomenal. Although they do build really good catapults for launching pegs. If you don't play Malifaux, you won't really know what I mean, but look up Malifaux peg launcher and you'll see what I'm talking about. Played a game a couple of weeks back where I was playing a gremlin boss whose entire play style is assuming that he's drunk, and my opponent was also playing a gremlin. His faction is really big on using attack pegs. So on my side of the table, we had a gremlin who was constantly getting drunk and poisoning people with his reanimated whiskey golem. It's a big construct made out of whiskey barrels. And if you hit it too hard, it's possible that you can get poisoned from it. It's kind of a cool game effect. And then Jeff, the guy I was playing against, he was lobbing pigs at me with his catapult. It was a really fun game. If you haven't checked out Malifaux, it's definitely worth an hour or so to check out their website. It's from Weird Miniatures. It's weird with a Y, and they make these just really cool, like, Wild West figures that they have all kinds of different factions. So there's like your gunslingers, and then there's the fairy creatures from the old legends have kind of come back, and they're not very happy to deal with people in their kingdom, so they're trying to chase them out. And then you got your gremlins and all kinds of other cool monsters and creatures. It's a neat little game. And you play with poker cards instead of dice. One of the videos coming up here, I'll actually make some Malifaux figures. Show a little technique that I've picked up to keep yourself from losing all your pieces. They're very, very small. It's like a model kit, a really tiny model kit of monsters that you put together. And if you're not careful, you can drop the pieces, and next thing you know, you're scrambling on the floor looking for somebody's hand, or half of a hand in some cases, because they'll go that small. Just trimming up some more boards here for the walkway. Looks like I need about 3 more inches worth. I'll do some paint, see how that looks. The other cool thing about the Celtec is it's pretty strong. I was looking at a couple of different options for terrain here in the last week, and one of my favorites is this paper kit that you can get from Dave Gratham Games. And he does all kinds of cool stuff like medieval buildings and futuristic cities and sailing vessels and stuff, but they're fairly strong. After you put them together, you make them out, you print them on your home printer on cardstock, and when you put them together, the bridges and the causeways are all pretty sturdy, but not as sturdy as this Celtec stuff is. I mean, you can push down pretty hard on the boards, and they're not going anywhere. They don't want to go anywhere. They want to look cool for your figures to run around on. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the comment section below. We'll definitely answer back for you. This is definitely my biggest hobby, my biggest pastime. It's probably what I spend more time doing than anything else. In between running a restaurant and making jerky and painting miniatures, designing coloring books, writing books, and doing Geekshow, this is what I do the most. Of course, if you like what you're seeing here, definitely give our YouTube channel here a like or a subscribe. It'll definitely help us to make more content in the future. And if we get enough subscribers, I'll actually start doing some live paint videos. Share some techniques. Gentleman I was talking to last week had some questions about painting things with white paint and how to do that without making it look too washed out. So I'll do a upcoming painting session where we just cover white paint, because as goofy as it sounds, it's one of the hardest colors to work with. Least of your problems that'll come up will just be that your white paint tends to look chalky if you don't mix it, or if you put too much of it on there. So there's some tricks that I'll show you how to do that'll help your white paint go on thin. I'll teach you how to do some glazes so you can layer your white paint, your highlights up. It'll look pretty cool when you're done, and not like you just painted with some chalk. All right, 2 more boards. I think we'll have enough. do some really neat finger armor with this stuff. If you took a piece like this thick and cut it in the circumference of like your fingers here, if you heat it up with a heat gun or just put it in a toaster oven for a couple of minutes until it gets soft, and then wrap it around something round, then when it cools, it hardens back up again, and you can make some really neat armor effects. Or I've seen some people use it to make towers, especially for your sci-fi games like Infinity. Now there's a new Star Wars tabletop combat game coming out pretty soon, Star Wars Legions, and I'm definitely going to be doing a couple of episodes, not only just covering the new figures and how they look and how they paint up, but showing how to make terrain for that game. You definitely want some cool Star Wars terrain, right? So I'm going to show how to make a Star Wars building like a Tatooine farmhouse, and then if that goes well, I'll actually build a vacuum form table, and we can work together and figure out how we can mass produce those buildings, because I have a feeling that I'm going to want to have a lot of those buildings out on the tabletop for stormtroopers to hide behind, because we know they can't shoot, they might as well hide. I can tell my knife is having a harder time getting through the Celtec now, so I'll definitely be changing up this blade before I do too much more cutting, because one thing I can't afford is how my muggle job is in a kitchen, is cut on my thumb. That's just vocational hazard that I don't want to have to deal with. Alright, so now that the rest of those boards are cut, let's get them scored. That wood grain texture in there. And if you go off of the board, it's no big deal. I mean, wood grain is never straight. It's always wavy and all over the place. Listening to classical music so that we do not violate YouTube's copyright terms for recorded music. Last I checked, Brahms wasn't copyrighted. Ha ha ha. And no, I'm not sure if this is Brahms or not. I don't have my computer screen open. I'm just playing music. It's going to be an interesting thing for the swamp board for the Malifaux Gremlins, is that Malifaux games are played on a 3 foot by 3 foot game surface. So doing up a swamp 3 feet by 3 feet, you want to make sure for this game in particular that you have a lot of areas that figures can hide behind, because cover rules are pretty important when you've got spell slingers and gunslingers. And so I'll probably be doing a lot of these walkways, and I'll be taking some epoxy sculpt and sculpting some mangrove trees. And you can get, there's a couple different things you can do if you don't want to sculpt, if you have a hard time with that. You can actually collect roots. Like if you dig a tree up, some of the roots in the ground, or if you're pruning a tree, some of the smaller branches, not too small, can actually look like pretty convincing tabletop scenery with just a little bit of paint, a little bit of weathering. I like to sculpt stuff because I like the challenge. And mangrove trees in particular are pretty weird to begin with. They're strange looking trees. So I'll be doing a tinfoil armature, sculpting over that with a 2-part epoxy resin. to make the mangroves. All right, 2 more planks to texture. Big thanks to Excitable James, who watched a couple of these videos that I was doing on the old YouTube channel and said, hey, I can make these pretty. So, wouldn't be able to do these new, cooler videos without him. So thanks, James. We don't say it enough. He's a real asset to what we do over in Geekshow. Okay, if you've ever painted PVC, sometimes there's a debate over whether or not you should prime it first. I know with the Reaper line of Bones figures, they're made of the same kind of expanded PVC, and some people think you don't need to paint them or to prime them before you paint them, and I found that they do take primer pretty well, and it can be a good asset for you later on to prime your figure. But I don't use a spray-on primer like for this Pathfinder figure here. I'm going to use a brush-on primer for her, but this is pretty much the same material as this. It's just an expanded PVC or cast PVC. You can see her arm's actually fairly bendable. The nice part about PVC figures is that they're pretty easy to customize. You can take a razor blade to them and swap out weapons and different pieces of equipment pretty easily. I know Reaper right now is the only company that's doing a lot of these PVC figures, and if you really want just a massive amount of miniatures, keep an eye on Reaper on Kickstarter. Once or twice a year, they do this huge Kickstarter program where they'll be giving away, or not giving away, but promoting several hundred miniatures for like $100. And you can get all kinds of really neat figures, orcs and skeletons and tavern people and different types of warriors and giants. And, you know, as you saw with that Pathfinder figure, that cleric, super detailed, and I'd say just as detailed as any metal figure that you're going to find on the market. It's pretty neat where figures are at right now. I would say we're in the golden age of miniature games right now. There's so many really neat companies out there. So many really talented sculptors, and then when you factor in Kickstarter and all the companies like Cool Mini or Not that are producing their own miniature games, whereas they wouldn't have been able to do that, 15, 20 years ago. All right, that last plank almost didn't fit in, but just the right amount of wiggle room to make that work. So there, that's the finished plankway. And let's grab a gremlin and see how it looks on there. Cool. So he definitely looks like he's. You could have a couple of skirmishes. Now this is going to be heresy because I'm going to bring 2 different figure lines in, but you can put this Grimkin on one side and this Gremlin on the other side. And they definitely look like they could tangle. All right. So for priming, I am going to prime the PVC. I actually think that it helps the paint stick a lot better in the long run. So hopefully my super glue is dried and I'm not going to be messing up my brush here. But just in case, let's use a messed up brush. So we don't have to worry about getting anything too detailed on here. I just want to cover the PVC with enough primer that the paint that we paint over it will actually have something to stick to. nice part about the primer is it goes on pretty smooth. You don't have to worry about it being too terribly thick. You can see from my palette, it's probably about a year's worth of layered on, caked on, dried on paint. Let's hit the side runners. This is a white primer from Vallejo Paint, so it's a really good overall primer. It's no more expensive than your regular Vallejo paint is, so less than $4. And you can paint a ton of miniatures with that, and a lot of scenery too. Careful, I'm gonna end up wearing as much paint on my hands as I'm putting on this. Alright, surface of that is nicely painted, primed and ready to go. So for our main color, I'm going to go with a dark brown. And then we'll highlight up from there, probably with some gradual dry brushing. So we'll do, this is a veteran of about 1 million painting campaigns. This is a Reaper Master Series paint. This black and brown, I think I've had this tube of paint for 6 years now. Not too shabby when you consider how much I paid for it. Talked about it in previous videos where you definitely want to know what you're getting into with your paints. You don't want to use your cheap pigment paints because you're going to use so much more with a coarse ground pigment than you will with one of these fine grind pigments like Reaper makes or Vallejo makes a really good paint. But part of the reason, I'll show you really quick, part of the reason why you want to go with one of these higher pigment paints is that you can dilute them. This thing of paint's so old that I actually have to take the squeeze nozzle off to get any paint out of it. Oh, this guy might be almost gone. Guarantee you, when you've had a tub of paint for this long, when they go, you miss them. I don't even know if Reaper still makes paints like this anymore. They probably do. So to dilute that, or to suspend that, I'm going to use this Citadel Lamian medium. It's basically a clear acrylic medium. So it allows you to thin your paint without diluting it. You're basically suspending the pigment farther apart molecularly, but you're not diluting it. So it's not going to do stupid things when you brush it onto stuff. And you can do this really, does a really nice job for making quick washes with just regular paint. So I'll show you with this gremlin. He's going to get painted soon anyway, so just deal with it, Sammy. One of the things I'll do, this figure's already been primed, so I'm going to paint just a thin wash on him so we can get his details. See how they just pop right out? This is going to make my job a lot easier when it comes time to actually paint the figure, because I'll already see where all my details are. This is Sammy LaCroix, by the way. He's kind of a gremlin witch doctor. Something about Sammy tells me he's a card cheat. A cheat at poker. So we're not going to paint this guy tonight. I'm just showing you how a diluted wash with just regular paint can really bring out all your details on your figure. That's before you even start painting it. And this is standard practice for me, so I'll figure out what color he's gonna, I know he's gonna be kind of dirty, dusky colors anyway, so that's why I'm going with the brown wash. It'll be easier to blend my colors into that kind of dirty color scheme that I'm going to be doing for him. Let's get a cape real quick, and then by that time, that causeway section should probably be ready to get some attention. Now you can do the same thing with like the Agrax Earth shade that Citadel makes, but this works just as well. So I just saved myself a bunch of time for when I actually sit down to paint Sammy here. So you can see. Just how breathtakingly beautiful he is. Oh, I love his hat. What's great about this figure is there's a running joke with the weird miniatures from LFO that they'll do like 15,000 pieces for something. So the bottom part of this doll here, and the middle part with Sammy's hand, and the top part of the doll's head were 3 different pieces. The front part of his top hat was a separate piece from the feather, from the stovepipe hat. So yeah, lots and lots of pieces for these weird miniatures, but boy, do they look great when they're done. And this is a plastic figure, by the way. 20 years ago, I would have swore it was metal because of the amount of detail that's on it. But a metal figure wouldn't have that little piece right there, that needle. That's enough about Sammy. All right. So our bridge segment's done. It's dried, at least the primer's all dried on it. So let's get some paint on there. Go ahead and dilute that. By painting with paint that's already somewhat diluted, it's going to save me some work a little bit later. You see the areas that I carved out with the dental tool, they just look like wood planks. All according to my plan. Alright, this brush is just a little too small for what I want to do, so I get Truckosaurus back out of the water. And yes, I name my brushes. You should name your brushes too. I call this one Truckosaurus because, well, she's big and she gets the job done. So I really like that episode of Futurama, where Bender tried to run off with the moon farmer's robot daughters. That Bender is an inspiration to all of us. So there's not going to need to be a lot of highlighting on this. It's going to happen. It has to. There doesn't need to be. I just contradicted myself. This is always my favorite part of painting a figure or a piece of terrain, because all the building, everything else that you've done, all comes down to this. This is the magic moment. This is where you start to see the final parts, the final stages coming together. Now, by final stages, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be 2 or 3 more hours of work on a piece like this before I put the legs on and the cross struts and the support beams to make this an actual operable piece of terrain. Oh, deleted it too much. Nice part is, paint's right here, picking it back up. Alright, that's pretty cool. Of course, you could do this as a picket fence too, if you want to make a, or not a picket fence, but a wood fence. Just do it smaller. Same principles. And then the other neat part about what we're doing here is a few master techniques like this. After a while, really small people will start asking you to build houses for them. By small, I mean, 1.5 to 2 inches in height, because you won't have the skill to build real people houses yet. But keep working. Reach for the stars there, Sparky. Now, the bottom part of this, I'm probably not going to highlight at all. This is not going to be seen, or if it is seen, it's going to be seen when we're placing terrain. I also didn't prime the bottom here, so you can see where the paint is beading, where it's kind of separating a little bit from the PVC. So I would say the answer to our question on whether or not we prime our PVC is yes. But again, it's not going to matter. No one's going to see this part. I just want to paint it so that there isn't white plastic shining through, because that'll take you right out of the game. One of the reasons why I do terrain like this, and if you're part of a gaming club like I am, you'll understand completely. There's a really cool thing that happens when you're playing a strategic tabletop war game or a skirmish game, where all of a sudden it's not just little pieces of plastic or pewter being moved around a board. If you have the right terrain, it becomes cinematic. The whole experience becomes very easy to visualize and picture in your head. So, for instance, the Malifaux game I was telling you about with my friend Jeff, it was a game that ended up being very cinematic. I just got a little bit of my primer in this. The reason why it ended up being as cinematic as it was because the game had terrain. So in this case, it was Plascraft carnival terrain. So there was some bleachers and like a Wheel of Fortune wheel and some circus wagons, and they're all done up to look like they'd kind of escaped from a Tim Burton tribute night at the local circus, which is great when you're playing inbred alcoholic gremlins. And because of that, there were a couple of times, especially considering we were playing characters that were so easy to imagine running amok at a carnival or a circus, that the game became almost as entertaining as like watching a really good movie or really good piece of animation, especially when you have just fun characters going at each other. So terrain becomes one of those things that you start thinking about pretty seriously, because you want to have that immersion, that cinematic escapism come out while you're playing. So just let this dry for a second, mostly because I need something to be able to hold on to. The other nice thing about acrylic paint is it dries so fast. I mean, even diluted as much as this stuff is, and it is pretty diluted, this will still be dry in less than 5 minutes. So we'll put that down. Let's think a little bit about highlights. So one thing, you'll notice that I already did an accidental highlighting medium there, just by allowing my white brush-on primer to mix with the brown paint. But that's not ultimately what I'm going for. So let's see. This is Arid Earth. This is from Army Painter War Paints. And I've talked about it before, I'll talk about it again. Still not completely sold on Army Painter. They are less expensive than the other paints. They have really, really good pigments, but I think their suspension medium might be a little on the cheap side because it separates like literally in days, and that's something that I haven't experienced with any other paint company. So Vallejo, I've had pots of Vallejo paint that I haven't touched in years that didn't need more than a little shake to get it all mixed up. Whereas, as you can hear from the shaking in my voice, I've been shaking this little pot of Army Painter paint here for probably a good 45 seconds. And hopefully that'll be enough that we don't see the suspension medium coming out first. Oh, cool. It actually mixed. All right, Army Painter, you live to see another day. Let's get one of the smaller brushes out. So we're going to do some dry brush. The thing with dry brush is that it's super easy to overdo it. When I learned how to dry brush, 9 times out of 10, it looked like I was painting with a spatula because I was not getting enough of the paint back off of the brush. So it just made a mess. And all you really want to do is drag a brush that barely has any paint on it across a raised surface, and that'll just leave enough paint on that raised surface to give you a highlight. This is still fairly wet. Somebody asked a live painting demonstration that I did at Salt Lake Comic Con why I was always painting on my fingers and my fingernails, and the only real answer I can give you on that is they're very natural palettes. Extraordinarily natural palettes. All right, so I'm getting a little weathering on these boards. And if you don't want to do a dry brush, you can just take a regular paintbrush. So I've got this slightly beat up Army Painter brush. I feel the same way about their brushes that I do about their paints. Actually, they start out pretty nice, and but after a few months of steady use, they start to fall apart. And that's not what I'm looking for in a paintbrush. I want something that's gonna stick with me for a while, because I like to do cool things with a paintbrush. I'd like to see the paintbrush actually make it long enough to see the fruits of its labor. All right, let that dry for another minute. Let's look at Sammy again. Poor Sammy. I'm going to mess with Sammy because he's here. Whenever I'm painting, I usually have a couple things out on the table in front of me because you need something to do while paint on one project's drying. So what I should be working on is a Space Wolf Dreadnought that I've had on my workbench for about 5 months. Every time I get a little farther on it, I think there's a Malifaux gremlin over there. Needs some attention. What else on Sammy's a light white here? What's a yellow white? I think the gremlins is they're mostly green, so I'm not going to be doing much on him. Green and brown. Looks like there's a couple little fangs back here. So I'll pop them out while I'm paying attention to them, because there's a really good chance that I'm going to forget that they're there later. That could be embarrassing. I might give Sammy a red top hat. He seems like the kind of guy that would appreciate a little flash. You can see the bottom. It's all fingerprints. So I'll definitely be going back over that after the top's done. Things just got dramatic on the radio station. I'm usually listening to really mellow music when I paint, because if it gets too intense, I get excited and it starts to show in the paint job. So, all right, there's still quite a bit of wet paint in the recesses here. Hopefully we can get a little bit of dry brushing done. Let's see how it's just bringing out the highlights on those boards. I'm only going to do the edges. The middle of the planks, they'll have their own detail, and that's where the figures will be anyway. See, I was bringing out the top of the plank really nicely. And I'm not even that worried. Like, if it gets on a little bit thick, that's okay. I'm going to do another wash over this when it's done. This brush was once a fairly good detail brush for things like battle tanks. I used to paint a lot of Lehman Russ tanks for Warhammer 40,000, and this brush probably painted 15 of them before it started to get frayed. And that's when you say, "Good job, soldier. You're a dry brush now." That brush never dies. It just gets repurposed. Alright, that's looking pretty good. We'll do another session. A couple days here where I'll show how to get the railings on there. Alright, so roughly, with the stuff that I did the other day before I started recording this, and then through the last 55 minutes or so of this recording, I'd say there's about an hour and a half's work in this, probably another hour's work going into it. Now this is the first one, which means that the next one will actually go a little bit faster, because first time through, you're working through whatever little chaos factors can pop up when you're working with a new material. One thing that I do want to check really quick before I finish this video is this board right here is fairly dry. Let's see what happens when we hit that with a coat of Agrix Earthshade. We'll do them side by side here. So here's your Nuln Oil, here's your Agrix. We're going to go for two completely different effects. So with the Nuln Oil would be for more of a decayed, beat up piece of scenery. So something that's been, say, like in a dark fantasy setting. So you do the Agrax. Look at that. That board looks a little more decayed, a little more beat up. If you want to go with something more of a high fantasy setting, then you'd go with something a little bit brighter, like this Agrax Earthshade. We'll do on the board next to it. And see how much brighter and friendlier that looks. I mean, it's not drastic by any means, but drastic is not what we're looking for here. So with this board, what's going to end up happening is it's going to get a coat of Nuln Oil when the bridge itself is completely finished. There's going to be a coat of Nuln Oil, and then I'll go over it with a brownish green ink to make it look even more weathered and beat up and decayed. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Next session, we'll definitely finish up this bridge, and then we're going to get to work on the Grimkin pumpkin head figures here. Can't remember, I think they're called Dreadrots. We'll definitely get to work on those because I have a project of a complete army of Grimkin figures from Privateer Press's Horde line by the end of October 2017, so that should be pretty awesome. Big thanks to our sponsor, Shiv Games, here in Murray, Utah. And if you want to get some really cool gaming in, I definitely recommend them as your game group. They're really cool people, and they'll help you learn a game. And if you don't want to learn a game, or if you're feeling a little bit shy, you can get 15 to 30% off retail. And make sure to tune in every Sunday night or Monday morning for a brand new episode of Geek Show Podcast coming to your ear holes wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Thanks a lot for tuning in. It's Lee George Cade with GSPC GSPC Tabletop. Almost went off on a completely different name there. And talk to you soon.